Hi, there's been a lot of speculation from the SBC community about what the Raspberry Pi 4 will look like, and the Raspberry Pi Foundation has really kept a lid on it. However, I was recently given a pretty honourable opportunity to road test a prototype of the Raspberry Pi 4. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. This video is being sponsored by JLC PCB, who make all my PCBs. They can produce 1 to 6 layer boards from 0.4 to 2 mm thickness, track widths down to 3.5 mm, via drill size down to 0.2 mm, and can handle BGAs, controlled impedance, cutouts, gold fingers, and even offer a panelization service. Even better is that for only $2 you can get 10 PCBs in any colour, manufactured in 24 hours. And if you haven't used them before, don't forget to claim your $20 shipping coupon off your first order. Click on the link in the description below to check them out. So last year I had the good fortune to be able to interview Eben Upton about the upcoming Pi 4. So here I am down at, what's the matter? You can hear me? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Sorry Eben, I usually take 1 or 2 takes to get it right. So here I am down at Electronica, and I'm about to interview someone you may recognise. Of course, he was a little cagey about it, but he did promise he would send me an early prototype.
You can't afford very many $1 SATA controller chips on the board.
I'll be posting that interview later, so hit subscribe if you want to be notified when I do. One thing to bear in mind is that before being sent this board, I had to sign a ton of NDAs to ensure that I wouldn't really leak any critical information. So alas, there's a lot of components and other aspects of this board that I can't show you. That also means I can't really show you a lot of the testing I've been able to do. So sorry guys, so what does the new Pi 4 give you? Starting from the top right, working clockwise. 2 USB 3.0 ports, gigabit Ethernet, another 2 USB 3.0 ports, micro USB for console, which wasn't provided on this prototype. SATA 3.0, oh yes, finally. A header which I haven't any idea what it's for, HDMI out capable of 4K at 60 Hz, and in a pretty bold step, a second HDMI out that apparently also can act as an HDMI in. Microphone, something that wasn't populated, but I suspect it's an audio jack. DC jack, which I'm not surprised about. If they had used USB Type-C, it would add too much to the overall cost of the board. So they're still trying to keep the cost down. Power button, MIPI CSI 2, reset button, another button which I couldn't find the purpose of, and interestingly there's now 2 Pi headers. The first one is a standard Pi header, and the second one is an extension of the first. And finally an IR transceiver. On the semi side we have a Realtek RTL 8211 gigabit Ethernet and transceiver, what looks like some sort of Wi-Fi module under the prototype label. Not sure why it wasn't included on this board. There's also the usual suspects of ESD protection and buck converters. At least on this board there's 4GB DDR4 RAM and 8GB eMMC flash, which I believe on the cheaper boards will be not populated. But if it is, it can be reflashed very simply using the micro USB port. And IC I haven't any clue about, but something to do with the GPIO headers. And the thing that I'm pretty excited about is the fact that both the GPIO headers aren't being driven from the SoC, but rather from a custom FPGA. I can't really show you anything about this apart from the fact that it's labelled AF0401, but more on that later. On the flip side we have an SD slot for backwards compatibility, a GL830 PMIC, and finally a custom SoC driving the whole shebang, which once again I can't really tell you about. All I can say is that it is indeed an ARM chip and being manufactured by Philips, of all people. It is a stack design which I'm told provides much better thermal control. No idea what the upper and lower layers are, and even if I did, I couldn't tell you. Now I've been told that the Pi 4 will come in 4 different flavours. The Pi 4 Maker Lite is the cheapest, aiming to be around the same cost as the current Pi 3. It will have a quad-core SoC with frequency scaling up to 2 GHz, 1 GB RAM, low-end FPGA, and no SATA and secondary HDMI, or in fact no eMMC. The Pi 4 Maker will increase RAM to 2 gigs and add 4 gig eMMC. Then there's a Pi 4 Pro Lite, which keeps the 2 gig RAM and 4 gig eMMC, but moves to a hexa-core sock running at 3 GHz, and faster FPGA along with SATA and secondary HDMI port. And finally, the Pi 4 Pro will have 4 gig RAM and 8 gig eMMC. The addition of the high-end FPGA, SATA and HDMI will add to the cost a fair amount, but no prizes for guessing which one I prefer. The board came with an OS pre-installed on eMMC, so I didn't have to reflash at all, which is nice. However, in terms of booting options out of the box, you can boot from eMMC, SD, Ethernet and also SATA, which is pretty cool. The desktop that came up was the familiar Raspbian desktop. Nothing really to see here, so moving on. Of course, I didn't have any Wi-Fi on board, but I could test out Ethernet speeds. Seems that the 802.11 based gigabit Ethernet drivers have been sorted out. Nice. And unfortunately, I can't show you any details of the SoC, but I know that I'm running a 3 GHz 6-core SoC. Nice. And once again, the NDA I signed stops me from showing you just how much better this new SoC is compared to other SBCs on the market. And I also can't show you all the benchmarks I ran. So I'm pretty keen to get into GPIO testing, because not only do I now have an additional 30 GPIOs, but they're all being driven from an FPGA. The newer Raspbian OS has all the tools installed to reflash the FPGA, which is nice to see. There's also a bunch of HDL example files that have been provided. There's a plain old Raspberry Pi GPIO layout for the first connector, which can also be sent to the secondary GPIO header, if you want to double up. There's also example files for WS2812 LED strips, RGB LED matrix displays, finite state machines, and the FPGA even has control over power to the main SoC, so it can push the board into sleep mode and wake it up on real-time events. Wow! And of course, no FPGA example files would be complete without an implementation of processors such as the RISC-V, 8051, Z80 and even 6502. Nice. But even better, there's also interesting HDL files such as SATA, HDMI out and HDMI in. As you would have seen earlier, there was a lack of specific SATA controller on the board, so it looks like this functionality is being provided by the FPGA. This is actually a fantastic move by the Raspberry Pi Foundation. It positions this board light years ahead of any other SBC currently on the market. Having an FPGA on board means it suddenly becomes a real-time powerhouse and makes it a very attractive board for makers. For example, if there's enough capacity on the FPGA, you could create 3 more SATA ports on the secondary Pi header. Why not? Or fire up a Z80 CPU core on the FPGA and use some of those headers to drive a VGA display. So this is fantastic for retro computer heads. Or even use the Pi 4 as the basis for a 32-channel logic analyzer. The more I get into this SBC, the more I'm loving it. So on to some actual testing, what works and what doesn't. First up, let's try some PWM outputs to see how fast I can get them. Pretty cool that it can go up to 200 MHz, nice. Of course, my usual GPIO LED flasher was okay, along with I2C and SPI. In terms of GPIOs, there wasn't anything that didn't work, and bear in mind that this is just a prototype. Oh, and one other feature I discovered is the fact that all GPIO outputs can be set to either 5, 3.3 or 1.8 volt logic levels independently. This solves the huge issue of logic levels that all makers come across at some point in their projects. It probably also explains the unknown IC at the top of the board, which seems to be controlled by I2C. So unfortunately, NDAs restrict me from showing you anything else. But believe me, there's a whole lot more going for this board that I can show. If this is just the prototype, then I'm pretty excited about the final release, as it's going to be an absolute game changer. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to hit like, and while you're there, you may as well hit the subscribe button. For those people who want to become a patron of this channel, there's several ways to do this, from Patreon, PayPal, and soon there will be Stripe. And you can join the fabulous group of patrons I already have helping keep this channel going. So thanks for watching, and see you next week. So you think everyone will pick up on all the April Fool's references I'm making? Oh, sorry.